So we've talked about how do I choose my hosting provider, what kind of things I need to pay attention to. We've talked about the infrastructure side. We've talked about the hardware side. So now my next question for my team is usually, okay, but what kind of hosting strategy do I use?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There are a number of strategies that you can use. Of course, if we look back at the past couple of years, there's three main ones which we see. One is that you put everything on physical infrastructure.
Yeah.
It could very well be that you might even have your own data centers if you're in a very large game studio, or already existing capacity that you used for previous games that you can simply reuse.
Yeah.
That one is a bit out of favor nowadays because not a lot of game studios have a significant amount of own personal infrastructure anymore, or their own data centers. And so what we also see is the other extreme, where game studios or publishers put everything in a single cloud provider.
It's very fashionable these days, yeah.
And that's also kind of putting all your eggs in a single basket, which we'll cover, of course, later. And then we see the hybrid mode, which is usually a combination of a physical infrastructure layer at one of the hosting providers, and then preferably multiple cloud providers to deal with the burst. And that's what I see the most nowadays in the current industry.
So it's very fashionable these days to go with cloud hosting. Everyone loves it. Can you tell me a bit more why?
So, of course, what cloud does really well is offer convenience, or at least the idea of convenience and the idea of flexibility. And of course, they do that really well. The marketing is really good, and they keep developing new kind of layers which are really convenient for developers to use. Of course, cloud 10 years ago, cloud was a virtualized service. And nowadays they have containers on top of them, and nowadays on top of that they have again serverless. And what most people don't realize when they, for example, use serverless, is in the background, the cloud provider spins up a container which might be running on a virtual server, which might still be running on a physical server. And at every level of convenience, there's more margin that you pay towards this cloud provider.
Yep.
So that convenience has a price, and that's kind of the downside of working with a cloud provider. The costs can get out of control really quickly.
Yes.
Well, of course, also the advantage that you can start small and easily scale up. But when we're talking about game service, which especially like also with a movie, the first few months usually have the peak usage, and then the game kind of dwindles down until your next release or content update. The cost can go out of control really quickly. And I've also many examples that the clouds are not as flexible as they would like to say. So when you're talking about thousands and thousands of servers, it's the same way they're talking about commit spans, yearly commits, locations being unavailable to you that you need to work around with. And if you have all your eggs in one basket with a single cloud provider, and also are deeply integrated with them, they will know it, and they will dictate the terms that you have to pay to.
Also, I get less wiggle room for my negotiation.
Get less wiggling room. And so that's definitely a warning sign, and that's why many parties did wake up and thought, okay, we should at least maybe consider using multiple clouds so we can offset that a little bit. But then there's usually the problem that you are deeply integrated with one, and then the first question is, how do you get out and find a way or a platform so you can use multiple cloud providers easily?
Yeah. It also feels a bit intuitive to go with different providers so that if one of them, for some reason, there's an outage somewhere, which has happened, then I get a backup with the other one. So that would be another reason why I would want to.
Yes, definitely. It's also for disaster scenarios. Especially the past year has proven that every single cloud out there can go down.
Yep.
Not just once, multiple times per year. So that's why it's good to spread your eggs in multiple baskets, so to say. But it's also not always an easy challenge from an engineering point of view. I understand that. When I talk to customers and they've been working with a cloud provider for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
They are deeply integrated. Then there's a lot of hurdles to get out of that ecosystem. And by then they usually know it and might even regret it. But yeah, that's also the way it is. Yeah.
Thanks. So these are like the advantages and the disadvantages of cloud. That's one thing. But you also mentioned bare metals. Can you tell me more about this one?
Yeah. So especially right now, bare metals offer you a significant cost advantage, especially for the capacity that's going to be running more than, for example, a half a day or more at the same time. Of course, if you have very short burst loads, like a little bit in the evening and on a month total, it might run for like a couple of days at most, then using multiple cloud providers to spread that burst is the most cost-effective way to go. But for everything else, you should really consider hosting that on the physical bare metal infrastructure, because the cost advantages there are so significant that you're really hurting your bottom line if you do not consider this. And it's not just cost, because we all know that with all the big hyperscaler competition going on right now, that in 5 or 10 years from now, that cost difference will probably be smaller, because we see cost competition happening between the cloud providers to try and buy market share. So there's also the added advantages of working with the same partner, with the bare metals on all these locations, having the network connectivity together with it, having the support staff, the relationship. Because I'm not sure how your experience is, but my experience when working with the hyperscalers is that I'm just a number.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a client. And I have never spoken to someone actually working at the engineering departments there. You're always talking to just the account manager at best. So it's a whole package that you have to consider. And I would definitely always advise going with a mix. Go with bare metal, cloud for your burst, and that's what now commonly is referred to as the hybrid model.
Yeah.
But yes, I do have to agree with bare metals. You lose some of the flexibility that you have with the cloud provider. So you should choose what is best for your game. And I cannot stress again that you should always consider your base layer and your burst.
Yeah. So kind of having an idea of what's the minimum number of players I'm expecting at all times. That would be my bare metals.
Yeah.
It would be stable and cheap. And then if I want more, there's a peak if I'm doing a promotion.
Yeah.
Then I burst into the cloud.
Yes, and definitely do it with multiple cloud providers.
Yeah.